Yo, it's Go, and welcome to the video. Phase 2 of Season of Discovery is just over the horizon, and we'll finally get an AoE ability called Hurricane, and we might be getting a rune to boost Hurricane's damage, amongst other things, called Gale Winds. So let's take a look at Hurricane and that potential rune. Hurricane is an uncapped 10-second channeled AoE spell to all enemies within an 8-yard radius, with a 36-yard range as long as you have 2 points in Nature's Reach, and also increases the time between attacks for all of those enemies by 25%. It costs 880 mana per cast with a 1-minute cooldown. The data mined rune is called Gale Winds, and it would increase the damage done by Hurricane by 100%, take away its 1-minute cooldown, and reduce its mana cost by 20%. So the damage per mob would go from 70 nature damage to 140 nature damage per enemy, and the mana cost would go from 880 mana down to 704 mana, making it 176 mana cheaper to cast. If we did happen to get this rune, unfortunately, none of our talents really increase Hurricane's damage or anything. There is Omen of Clarity that could reduce its mana cost completely. It requires us to melee, which we might still be doing in Phase 2. Nature's Reach increases its range, but Nature's Grace will not reduce the cast time by 0.5 seconds since it's a channeled ability, not a casted ability. And even Moonglow wouldn't further reduce the mana cost either. There's also 0 pushback protection until we get Barkskin, which isn't until level 44. So how many Hurricanes are we going to be able to cast until we're completely out of mana? Great question. Let's take a look. I have here my pre-raid Nomer best in slot set, and I've added a couple of buffs. So I have Arcane Intellect, Kings, Mark of the Wild, and a Greater Intellect Elixir. And that puts me at about 3,500 mana as a Tauren. So if we do not get the Gale Winds rune, we should be able to cast about 4 Hurricanes. But if we do get this Gale Winds rune, we'll be able to cast an additional 5th Hurricane before we're out of mana. So potentially 50 seconds of some pretty decent AoE. Let's take a look at one more thing, and that is the spell power coefficient to see how it's going to scale throughout Phase 2 when we get additional spell power. If you go to Wowhead and search any spell and scroll down, they will have some effect portions down at the bottom. This is where you can find out the spell power mod, which for Hurricane is 0.03, meaning 1 spell power will add 0.03 damage per tick of Hurricane. If we take a look back at my Phase 2 pre-raid set, I have about 179 spell power, and then assuming we're going to be able to continue to use the Black Fathom boon, it'll bring us up to just over 200 spell power. And to be really precise, I'll go ahead and even use the exact formula for Hurricane, which 3.5 divided by 3.5 is 1 times 0.95 divided by 3. And then this is for the entire spell duration, so we have to divide that by 10. And then now I can multiply this by 200, and each tick per mob will have an additional 6 damage with 200 spell power, so it doesn't scale very well in my opinion. Unless of course you're pulling groups of 16 or more mobs and you're adding an additional 100 plus DPS, then that might look a little bit better on the damage meter. I think that about covers every single thing that you would ever want to know about Hurricane, but there's one other rune to go over quickly. I'll just let Josh Greenfield, aka Agrand, do the explanation of why we won't be getting an additional AoE nature spell that we've seen so far already in WoW Classic.
And also just movement abilities too. Like knockbacks are actually a kind of an interesting sort of like how the sauce is made. Knockbacks don't actually work in original WoW. Like that was a construct that came along in later versions of WoW. And so we started to look at like, oh, what it would it look like if you got like Typhoon or something as a druid to knock people back. And it's like, well, we started to look at rebuilding how that would work in original WoW, and then we started really thinking about it. And it's like, yeah, we can do it, but it just does that feel right? Be able to move people around, like Warriors had like basically a death grip at one point too, and it's like, oh, moving people around the battlefield, does that feel very
It was
very
cool.
vanilla?
Like they
It
threw
was
a chain
cool.
at something and whipped them back.
Don't be expecting Typhoon anytime this season. I'll have a link and it'll be on the screen now to check out the rest of that interview. There's lots of little tidbits in there, and they further explain other mechanics that they don't intend to have in SoD. So thanks for watching, and see you in Phase 2.